Colts put out their first depth chart of 2022 this week, and on the latest episode of Locked On Colts, we are here to tell you what we think that you should know about it. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Colts fans? Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Jake Arthur, joined as always by the incomparable Zach Hicks. Today, we're going to break down this initial Colts unofficial depth chart that they put out. We'll also be discussing where this receiver core stands after a couple weeks and 8 practices. The last 2 being of the rough variety, so it kind of needs to be revisited. And then last, we're going to see who needs to finish out these last 2 weeks of training camp strong. So, Zach, we'll go ahead and just lead off with the receivers. Sunday and Monday, lots of drops. It appears there were some wrong routes that have been run, leading to some interceptions, which in practice, that's one thing, but in a game, those are backbreakers. It's really tough because we've seen some quality performances from guys. We've seen growth. But, even in the past, we've had camp superstars, Deion Kane, Darius Fountain, Mike Strawn, and it led to nothing in the regular season. So even if we had seen one of those guys this summer, that doesn't really say that there's going to be anything big happening. To me, it's more telling about the mistakes. So it kind of begs the question, do the Colts need to bring in a veteran, a reliable guy that they know can get the job done?
I go back and forth with it because, we've talked about it a lot this offseason. The Colts going into this season, Kiki Kuti is their second most experienced wide receiver going into the year. And he's battling for a spot for, the 5th or 6th spot. We don't even know if he's going to make the team. And he's your second most experienced receiver in terms of snaps and receptions and receiving yards and yada, yada, yada. So we don't know, it's hard to say, yes, you want to put all of your trust in these young guys. Paris Campbell is looking great in camp. He's had a really strong camp and he's doing Paris Campbell things. But how much do you rely on Paris Campbell come regular season? It's the unfortunate fact of the situation there. Alec Pierce is coming along pretty well, but he's still having a lot of rookie issues, from drops to not getting open in team periods against these really good Indianapolis Colts corners. And then Ashton Dulin, you're seeing a lot of good positive progression, but is that enough to be, a guy to rely on there at wide receiver 2 or 3 sometimes if Campbell goes down or if Pierce isn't ready? So I could see the argument for it. I could see someone saying look, they should add a T.Y. Hilton or they should add a I think Will Fuller is out there or Keelan Cole might still be out there. I'm not too sure if he's still out there, but these are veteran guys who have produced in the NFL, over the course of their career, maybe not at a high rate, but definitely more than what we've seen from these guys. But I don't know. Part of me still says it's early in camp. We still have a couple weeks left in camp. If they don't figure out the mental mistakes, the drops and the wrong routes come regular season, sure, I'm okay with looking into a veteran because the benefit of having these veterans, like a guy like T.Y. Hilton, let's just focus on Hilton here. T.Y. Hilton can just step in and go. We don't. Yeah. He knows Frank Reich's offense. He's a guy who it won't be a long process to get him caught up. So even you could take this all the way to week 1, and then if it's not looking ready, you can bring in a T.Y. Hilton maybe to be ready by week 1, week 2. So I don't think there's any rush right now, but I do think it's something worth monitoring because, again, these young receivers, we've seen good things, but it really hasn't been that huge step that we're kind of hoping for them all to take because, again, we're going to rely on these guys a lot in the passing game.
Yeah, I think I put myself in the exact same camp there. We both said if guys are dropping like flies to injuries or if it's a disaster, that's when you bring in the veteran. And that hasn't been the case yet. It's been a rough couple days, but I'm not yet ready to throw the panic flag on that. And like you said, we're taking any big name guys out of it. T.Y. Hilton is probably the most realistic option.
Right.
And that's a guy they could literally bring him in at the same time they would sign guys off waivers during preseason cuts or something.
Right.
That the timing of that really doesn't matter. Other guys, like you said, you're looking at Will Fuller. Why is he not signed to a team yet? He's had injury issues. He had a suspension last year. Emmanuel Sanders. That's honestly, other than T.Y. Hilton, Emmanuel Sanders might be the next best.
I don't hate that one. That one's interesting.
Right?
I'm not completely against that one.
Right. Same here. He's like 35, I think. He's not at a point in his career where he's gonna say, I'm not coming there unless I'm the second or third guy.
Right.
He knows he'd be taking a back seat. And if young guys are developing, cool. Otherwise, like Adam Humphries, Deshaun Jackson, it's not a great group, but it's honestly an appropriate group for what the Colts need. But still, it's pretty much TY or bust for the most part. I think both of us feel that way. I'm still wanting to see what these young guys provide. Just avoid the mistakes is my biggest thing. I'm not expecting anyone to come out and look like Strawn from last year.
Right.
But like eliminate the mistakes and just keep growing, become better route runners. Reggie Wayne is kind of perfect for this right now. It's a lot of young guys, and they have someone who has been there and done that as their coach. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, no, for me too, like, again, give these kids the preseason, give them the rest of this offseason here, and just see what your comfort level is then going into the regular season. Because come cut down day, you got to look at a team like Tampa. Tampa is going to have to cut two of these three guys, Jalen Darden, who was their 4th round pick, Tyler Johnson, who has been a productive player for them, or Scotty Miller, who's been a really productive player for them last couple of years. They're going to have to move on from probably one or two of those guys in that group. So if you're not feeling good about your wide receiver room, you could maybe flip a late round pick to Tampa, or you could grab one of those guys off of, after they get cut. Maybe over in New York, Darius Slayton might get cut. You could see maybe like a Denzel Mims getting cut from the Jets. So there are kind of some options.
Okay.
Yeah, of guys who could be released or guys could be traded on cut down day. We have seen Chris Fowler do it quite a bit, where he has made trades at the last day of cut downs or something. They traded for Matt Pryor last year. They traded Darryl Daniels for Marcus Johnson a couple of years ago as well. They do a lot of these type of moves. I think they traded who was it? One of those slow linebackers for Lindsey Pipkins his first year that he was here. I remember that one as well. But he makes a lot of those trades late in camp to shore up positions that he's a little worried about. So if receiver is in that dire straits right there, he could make a move there still. But I want to give these kids the rest of the preseason. I still think they played fairly well here in camp, even, despite the mental mistakes the last couple of days. And, again, Paris Campbell, you spent a high pick on. Alec Pierce, you spent a high pick on. Those are guys you want to see get some runs. So even if you're going to bring someone else in, if they're both healthy, you want to see them out there.
Yeah, I think in the end, what I kind of take most solace in is it's not just a receiver group. It's a group of pass catchers. This offense is going to operate receivers, running backs, and tight ends. They'll all participate. Nyheim Hines is one of the best pass catching backs in the league, and we're pretty
wide receiver Nyheim Hines. Wide receiver Nyheim Hines. It's finally happening.
Yeah, we're pretty sure he's going to get a hefty amount of receiver looks. We're already seeing it. Jonathan Taylor, that's always been an underrated part of his game, but he very much can do it. The tight ends, it's a mixed bag. So far, it's a lot of young guys, a lot of youth, but a lot of size there as well. So I'm just banking on it being a group effort. If they wind up bringing in one of these older guys, that'll be the 3rd or 4th guy. That's cool. But I don't think they're in dire straits quite yet.
Yeah, no, last thing I'll say on this, if they do bring in a guy, like, let's say they bring in like an Emmanuel Sanders, I'm hoping he's taking snaps from an Ashton Dulin and not from Paris Campbell or Alec Pierce. Like, again, I love Ashton Dulin. I hope he gets the proper run this year. But if you're taking any snaps, I'd hope it's from Dulin and not from those two guys, because at the end of the day, I mean, Campbell, I get it. He's been here for a couple of years, but they spent a high pick on him. And if he's healthy, I want to see him out there. Alec Pierce, they just spent a higher pick on him. Like, I want to see those guys out there, even if it is kind of like your, we're not calling this your all-in window, but it's your, you're kind of going for it window with an older quarterback. You still want to see these young guys, because if you get these guys overperforming on rookie contracts, especially Alec Pierce, that's a huge benefit to your team.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's one of the bigger reasons the Colts haven't brought in someone new is giving those developmental snaps to the guys who really need it. So the Colts are betting on these young receivers. You guys could be betting on NFL games. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and Zach, even golf.
Even golf.
Even golf. Did you know, Zach, that Colts running back Jonathan Taylor is the odds-on favorite in the NFL on BetOnline to win Offensive Player of the Year at plus 700?
I did see that the other day. I did. I'm not going to bet on that because it's such an easy bet. I don't know how much money I'd make, but if you guys want to make some easy money, I mean, he was right there last year.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sport wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Jake, so let's jump into this depth chart here because this is what all the talk has been on Twitter. We weren't even prepared for this today. We had to kind of throw something together because we had other stuff planned, and then they decided to release its depth chart on us. But honestly, I'm not too shocked by many of the listings on here, but we'll start on the offensive side here. Mike Strawn I don't think was listed at all, which some people would be like, oh, it's because he's on the PUP. He's technically not on the active roster. But on the other side, Shaquille Leonard was listed, and he's not on the active roster. So do you think that's kind of them hinting that he might be on PUP to start the regular season?
Honestly, that's kind of how I read it. It was the first thing I noticed, or one of the first things, because, Darius, and we'll get to it, but Darius was listed at a new spot. And I said, okay, so I didn't think they would have the PUP guys on there. So I went and checked for Strawn, and he wasn't on there at all.
Right.
So to me, I either read that as, an accident, an omission. We all do it. We flub stuff on articles all the time. Or they expect Darius or Shaquille to be back sooner rather than later, whereas Strawn maybe the way that Strawn gets onto the roster or on the team, I guess, is through PUP, remaining on PUP to start the year. Because some of us were talking about it the other day. How else do you keep him with the team this summer other than him remaining on PUP if he doesn't get back in the next week or so?
Yeah, no, I think that's the only way. And what was telling for me, because I didn't even realize it until I saw you talking about it, was every other injured player was on there. Guys who like Dennis Kelly has been out for like over a week now. And he might end up on, IR for all we know, because he's going to be out for a good bit. He was there at the bottom of the roster, or bottom of the depth chart still. All those injured guys were listed at the bottom. Chris Williams, another guy who's been out for like a week, was listed there at the bottom, So all the injured guys were there except for Mike Strawn. And I do think this kind of hints at, he might be missing a little bit of the year. And honestly, I think that's best for him. Start the year on PUP. You're guaranteed out the first 6 weeks. And if the wide receiver core is not looking good through 6 weeks, they could just activate him and he could actually have a roster spot. So it might be a blessing in disguise for him, honestly.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt for him to just be around the team, see how things operate more under Matt Ryan, and get the extra playing time that he's been missing once he gets eventually activated from PUP in this situation that we're laying out. But another spot I noticed was the wide receiver and tight end clarity. It's not really different from what we were expecting. Pittman, #1, of course. Pierce, the other, the next guy outside. Campbell in the slot. Let's see who else it was. And then Patman or Doolin, Patman, and QT, which other than probably flipping QT and Patman was pretty much where we were expecting.
The way they had it with QT was the backup at slot. And Patman was the backup behind Alec
Which
Pierce.
it's kind of interchangeable depending on how you're lined up, but yeah.
Right. You got to basically look at the tiers. Pierce, Campbell, and Pittman are your starters, and then those other 3 are your main backups to those starters.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say like that 1 through 6. It's more of tier 1, tier 2, or starters and backups. So I wasn't shocked by anything about that, but the tight end group, that was a little shocking because I think Drew Ogletree was over Jelani Woods, right?
Yeah, it
Yep.
looks like Mo, Kylan Granson, Drew Ogletree, and then Jelani Woods, which
Right.
is kind of what we've been thinking it might look like lately. Woods hasn't, he's a rookie tight end. It's fine for him to take a little bit. We knew he'd be raw. But with Drew Ogletree's emergence coming along and Kylan Granson hasn't done much to relinquish his spot, that's kind of how we thought that pecking order would land recently.
Yeah, no, that was super interesting. Outside of that, on offense, the O-line, I don't think anything surprised me. Defensive line, a little bit of surprises. Ben Banigou and Dio Adembo were both listed at Leo, and they had Ben Banigou ahead of Dio on there. I mean, obviously Dio's making the team. Like, he's definitely making the team. But I thought that was interesting. And then on the interior, RJ McIntosh was over Curtis Brooks and a couple other guys, Byron Cowart and all those other guys there. Which I thought was kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, that one. So they have the two injured guys right now, Chris Williams and Byron Cowart. They're at the bottom of the defensive tackle depth chart. And Williams entered camp as the third guy. So I don't know how valid that is. To me, that's another don't overreact to depth chart stuff. But yeah, McIntosh has been really involved. And it's not that he doesn't have talent or anything. He's just been hurt the last couple of years. So
yeah.
He's an interesting prospect when he's out there, and since he's been able to practice for the Colts all throughout camp, they must be liking what they've seen. As for Dio, I think they're just throwing him somewhere on the depth chart because I've seen him at Leo, I've seen him at Big End, I've seen him at 3-Tech, probably nose as well. I've seen him all over the line, so I think they're just putting him in a spot. But since they have Taekwon as the second team Big End, it's kind of where I figured Dio might land was second or third. But I mean, applause for Taekwon for being able to stick there and not have any big issues with his knee.
Yeah, no, I mean, applause to, honestly, the top 6 defensive ends. We got to just throw some credit their way because, obviously the starters, Kwity Paye and Yannick Ngakoue are getting all the hype throughout camp. But Ben Banigou, Dio Adembo, Taekwon Lewis, Ifedi Odenigbo, I've seen their names popping up throughout camp. Like those are 4 names that people are going crazy about almost every day. Each day people will have their winners articles, and half the articles will have Ben Banigou and Dio, and the other half will have Taekwon and Odenigbo. So it's like those guys are all playing well. It's going to be hard to cut one of those guys. And honestly, at this point, I'm going to try to make sure that all 6 make it when I project the roster.
Yeah, with how much rotation they do, and I really want to know how much weight positional numbers carry into it, because at a certain point, if you have a super deep group, you want to keep as many as you can, especially at such a rotation heavy position like the defensive line and defensive end, bringing that edge rush. So I don't envy the guys who have to cut those guys, because that's a tough one. The next one we were getting at was Shaquille Leonard being listed as the Mike. He's been a Will for 4 years now, but now under Gus Bradley, listed as Mike. And now I think you're the perfect person to answer this. You've been doing the Gus Bradley glossary lately. Your last 2 pieces, I think, have been on the linebackers. So given Bradley's past and what we've seen from Leonard, what do you think is behind this?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this fairly brief because we still have to touch the secondary real quick. But, with Shaquille Leonard, I had someone on Twitter mention this too. They were like, oh, but he's such a great playmaker and he's such great at this. I'm like, yes, Shaquille Leonard is an outstanding playmaker, great reactability, and he just has good instincts without really trying. Like it's so natural for him. But he's not one of those players who plays well with his back to the ball, running after receivers down, on vertical routes and such, and kind of having to do a lot of that stuff where he doesn't have eyes on the quarterback. He is at a point of strength when he has his eyes on the quarterback. The Mike in pass coverage, in the nickel, the 4-2-5 stuff, is in more of those situations where the wheelbacker is going to be sprinting on those vertical routes. Corey Littleton, if you could ask him last year, he was turning and running on so many vertical routes last year, and that suits Bobby Okereke so much more than Shaquille Leonard. So I'm glad they made this switch. And honestly, for people who say Shaquille Leonard was just a Will with Indy or was a Will with Indy, in a lot of base sets, Shaquille Leonard was a Sam backer. And I go over that in one of my articles, so you guys can definitely see where my reasoning was for that. But he played a lot of Sam backer. Now, I'm not saying he's an elite, block shedder in the run game, but he did play a lot of Sam. He did have to fill a lot in the run game. So I think this is a good switch. I actually really agree with this, and it kind of takes away some of my concerns that I mentioned in my second article with the Gus glossary, where I was like, Shaquille Leonard with his back to the ball is kind of concerning. Now he's still going to have to do that at Mike, but not as much as what he would have to do at Will.
Yeah, and there were some concerns about the Colts run defense switching to this new scheme as well. Do you think that helps?
Yeah, I think, honestly, when I was looking through it, I think that it's a lot of the same basic 4-3 principles when it comes to fills and gaps and stuff like that. So I'd probably want Leonard more at the Will in the run game, but there's so much rotation that goes. There will be a lot of plays where the Sam is playing Will and the Will is playing Sam and such like that because of motions and such, that it's really hard to decipher and say like these are for sure things. But I think this is more of a pass game thing, and I think this does fit Leonard better, especially when Leonard's missing all of training camp. He's not really getting that adjustment to having to play this back to the ball or back to the quarterback a lot more. This kind of will ease that transition for him a little bit better.
Yeah, and something like this makes perfect sense as to why the Colts like to grab linebackers who they say can play all three spots. Realistically, it's usually two of the three, but they like to get guys who they think can play all three of those. Now, moving behind the linebackers, what did you point out as kind of mental notes in the secondary?
Yeah, the last thing we'll touch on really quick here before we get to our last segment is Nick Cross, I think, was starting at strong safety, which we kind of assumed it would go that way. Mm-hmm. But in camp, how you said last podcast, in camp, it was kind of being more of a rotation. It will still be a heavy rotation come regular season, but I do like having the rookie there as a starter. And then obviously corner 5 and 6, you got Tony Brown and you got Marvell Tell. Those are probably the two guys that are fighting for that spot. So it's cool to see that on the depth chart, seeing like, okay, that is solidified. It's those two guys.
Yeah, with how much rotation they've done, that it's pretty much laid out exactly how things came out on day one. I think I told you, Tell and Rogers were the outside guys. Tony Brown seemed to be getting the first shake at being the second team's Kenny Moore.
Right.
So it's kind of exactly how it's worked out. Nick Cross coming back to being the first team strong safety. Like you said, there's going to be rotation there, but it was interesting to see that he's put there initially as the starting guy. But McLeod, obviously, he's gonna have his stuff, but he's been in the box a lot.
Yeah. No, McLeod is going to see so many snaps this year. Like he's going to be on the field a lot at strong safety and free safety. So if you're a big Rodney McLeod fan listening to this podcast, don't worry. He will definitely see the field this year.
Yeah. So that's about it for the depth chart. I mean, there's always stuff to pick apart, but that's kind of the main things we figured you guys might want to know. Next, the Colts are off today, but they have 2 weeks left of training camp. There are several guys who have maybe taken a step back or we're still waiting to see more from. So here are a handful of guys who we think have the most to prove with these 2 weeks remaining. I'm going to start out with Deion Jackson, running back. And honestly, today's depth chart really reiterates that.
Yep.
So he didn't initially make the roster last year as an undrafted guy, but he made the practice squad and then eventually came on to the active roster and really kind of booted Marlon Mack out of the active rotation,
right?
Because of his special teams ability. Now, he came into camp as the third guy, even though they did sign Phillip Lindsay and Tyson Williams. But on the first practice, Deion Jackson was the first guy out there after Jonathan Taylor and Hines. Fumbled a couple times on that first day. And ever since then, Phillip Lindsay has run the ball really well. And now, it's got Jackson shuffled down to RB5 behind Tyson Williams as well.
Yeah, we did mention when they signed Tyson Williams and when they signed Phillip Lindsay that it was going to be an uphill battle for Deion Jackson, but his calling card was always going to be those special teams, that special teams ability. And it's hard in training camp to show your special teams ability. So the biggest thing for him in these preseason games is to show that, hey, I can be maybe not a gunner, but be an up man, be a guy who can block on those punts and can run down and make plays still, make plays on kickoffs and kick returns and such like that. So he's going to have to really, really prove that ability because that is how he's going to make the roster. Tyson Williams is not going to beat him out on special teams, and Tyson Williams is probably a better runner than him when it comes to, actually running the football. So if you want to make it as RB4 behind Phillip Lindsay, special teams is going to have to be your calling card. So he's going to have to really show that here in these preseason games.
It was big for Jordan Wilkins. I mean,
Right.
as good of a
Huge.
runner as Wilkins was, special teams was his thing, and he was that personal protector on the punt team. And
Right.
just like you mentioned, so beyond Jackson, who was another person that you had?
Yeah, no, and I think you and I have talked about this so many times that if we could pick the bottom of the wide receiver chart right now, we would say Kiki Kuti over Des Patman.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the coaching staff would agree with us, but that means Des
Mm-hmm.
Patman, at least in our eyes, has to have a big rest of camp and preseason because Kiki Kuti is looking good. And
Yeah.
he brings an extra element that Des Patman doesn't have in terms of speed and experience. So it's going to be hard, again, at least in our eyes, we have no clue how the coaching staff is viewing it, for Patman to make the roster over him. So he needs to really stand out in the preseason like he did last year. He really stood out last year. So if he can really have the preseason that he had last season, I'm sure he'll make the team. But as of right now, I know which way you and I are thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is year 3. You want to see a bit of more development from him. He does do a lot of special team stuff. But as for a receiver, he's about like 6'4", 220 and change. He's a big guy. I kind of want to see him be more than just a downfield threat. Like, so far, that's kind of all we see is these downfield throws to the boundary, which he's great at.
Right.
But with his frame, I feel like we should see more. And there's an opportunity to see it. So
a mini story here, just not to go on too much of a tangent, but a couple years ago, I did a film interview with a draft prospect named Jalen Johnson, obviously a very good corner for the Bears right now. And the film interview that we did, we actually broke down his game against Washington State. And I asked him, like, oh, what was your guys' game plan against Washington State? One of those receivers was Desmond Patman. And he said, look, that team was big, but they hated being touched. They hated physicality. They did not like when you got up on them. And I do think Patman's gotten better at adjusting to physicality in the NFL, but he still kind of is like that big receiver who doesn't like contact. He's more of a finesse receiver for a guy who doesn't have that finesse speed. So yeah, I'm with you. I think he needs to show more physicality and more dominance in that area.
Absolutely. And aside from Patman, I'm going to say Ben Banigou as well. He's been a summer superstar. It's good to see him as the second Leo here. But some other guys are kind of catching up to him. The defensive line has been really good throughout camp. So I guess he's not falling behind. I guess it's more just, keep doing your thing, man. Show out in these preseason games too. Make sure it's not just a practice thing. But shoot, if Eddie Adenigbo is doing really well,
yeah,
guys are catching up.
Yeah, I think with Banigou, it's really just about crossing your T and dotting your I at this point. Like, you're probably making the roster. They have kept you this long. They have not cut you. They have not traded you. And this is finally the scheme that really fits his play style. So I doubt that they'll move on from him. But, again, you need to come out here and have a good preseason like he always has. He needs to continue what he's doing in camp. I think he should be safe, but it's always, you're always in jeopardy when you've only played 100 snaps in 2 seasons.
Yeah, very, very true. So one of my last guys, I'm gonna knock it off, and I'm gonna put you on a little bit of a spot here. Rodrigo Blankenship. It's legit. He does need to have a good ending because him and Jake Verity were neck and neck coming into yesterday's practice, and then Verity, had a better practice. His leg looks a little better. Neither of them have a elite distance, but
perfect. Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. That's what I love to hear, Jake.
Right. Don't you love just talking about kickers? I will cede that one, and I will give you another player you can talk about.
Yeah, I'll speed run the last 2 here because we're running a little short on time. But Marvell Tell is obviously another one that we want to see perform here in the offseason. Like you said, he's had kind of a bounce back camp. And he's kind of taken that cornerback 5 spot, a depth spot on the outside. So you just want to see that carried into the preseason games. And then one more guy I want to throw out there is Sterling Weatherford. He's kind of falling down from where we expected him to be. We expected him to be up there with JoJo Doman, and it seems like he's kind of falling behind even Forrest Ryan at this point. So we want to see him with his upside kind of take that step here in these preseason games and kind of earn a roster spot.
And we're running a little long, but you mentioned Marvell Tell, and I wanted to say this anyways. So if you guys didn't see my notes from practice number 7, I think it was, So Marvell Tell, he had the rookie year that was flashy. Second year was COVID year. He opted out. Took a step back last summer. Was kind of, I think, practice squad throughout the year. But he's bounced back and he looks better and he's built off that rookie year this summer. Something I really liked from him during a special teams drill. I think he pulled Dallas Flowers aside and was coaching him up on stuff on the side. And that goes beyond having confidence. That's being a leader at that point. And like, enough, you want to bring these other guys along. So that was just something really cool I noticed from him. I like to see those layered things from guys. So
yeah,
that's another thing. He's obviously a little more comfortable there. So I think that is it for us today, guys. We'll be back with you tomorrow. The Colts get back to the practice field on Wednesday and Thursday. They then have a travel day on Friday, and then they will be in Buffalo smashing tables and maybe some Bills on Saturday. We don't know. Maybe some pumpkins to keep with our music references.
Yeah, make sure you guys are all going to BetOnline to bet on the Colts upsetting the Bills this upcoming weekend. 3.5 point spread. I mean, I know you guys are degenerates, so make sure you jump on that. But make sure you're following us there on social media at Jake Arthur NFL on Twitter, at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. You can follow all of our written work at horseshoehuddle.com. Jake is doing a great job with all the notes and updates. And I'm kind of, knee deep in all this Gus Bradley stuff right now. So make sure you check that out as well. Then over here on YouTube, you can follow our channel, Locked On Colts. We're nearing 700 subscribers, which, we're getting close to that thousand mark. So make sure you're getting on that. And then wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, just leave us rate, review, subscribe, leave us a comment or anything like that. We take all comments well. Jake had one on the YouTube video that was said in a really nice way, and it was just criticism that we love that. I think it was JDMB Ambassador, I think was his name. So shout out to you for leaving a very nice critique, because we take it. We're very laid back guys. We're cool with critiques. So whatever your thoughts are on the podcast, just leave it below. Even if you just want to say, what that one guy said, I can't stand the Zach Hicks guy, no matter what. However you want to go about it.
Oh, poor Zach. No, thank you guys. Thank you guys again for making us your first listen of the day. Now make Locked On Fantasy Football your second listen. We are in the thick of fantasy draft time. I know my home league, we're doing ours in a couple weeks. So guys, go ahead and find the intellectual fantasy expert, Vinny Iyer, over at Locked On Fantasy Football. He brings you over 20 years of NFL experience and a unique angle to give you the moves that no one else has. Get ready for your fantasy drafts with Locked On Fantasy Football. We'll see you guys tomorrow.